A good nerve Shabbos. Mela, sometimes it happens. You have to go to war. That's the way things go. But to sing a song about it, is that really fitting? Is that appropriate? Songs are for love, right? Love me do. I want to hold your hand. Una furtiva lagrima. That's a song. Okay, maybe if there's a military victory, you want to celebrate that with a song. Okay, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav after the 67 war. Or actually a number of songs that came out of Israel's wars. Fact of the matter is, many songs do have quite a bit to do with war. Not victory, but war itself, like blood and guts. The Marseillaise, for example, the Star-Spangled Banner, bombs bursting in air. They play it at Jays games. We will recapture with the sword, says the Polish national anthem. There's a lot of blood in El Canto degli Italiani. You know, the Italians are very much known for their ferocity on the battlefield. When you come to think of it, Hatikva is pretty peaceful, and O Canada, also, for the most part, the English version anyway, until you get to the French, and it speaks about La Croix. La Croix in our family is a favorite brand of canned seltzer, but La Croix has been at the forefront of many battles and many massacres to our enduring sorrow. Shir HaShirim, also the Song of Songs, pretty peaceful, even in Art Scrolls translation. When we read the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam, every day in our davening, it's about the horse and riders of Paro's army sinking into the depths. When we read it as a Torah portion, we also read the Shira, the Song of Devorah, the prophetess from Shoftim, Book of Judges. Also a lot of war going on there. Midrash Rabbah speaks about 10 songs, 9 written, recorded in different places in Tanakh, and a 10th song, the 10th one, the final one, to be sung in the Messianic era. One of those 9 is in this week's Parsha. And since we so infrequently pay it very much attention, let's take a closer look at the Song of the Well in Parshas Chukas. The context is the 6th Aliyah of this week's Sedra. The beginning of the Parsha involves Para Aduma, this chok, this unfathomable mitzvah which gives the Parsha its name, and which usually takes up a lot of the airtime in drashas and sermons and shiurim. There's also the passing of both Miriam and then Aaron HaKohen, so not only their baby brother Moshe, but the entire Jewish people are bereft. There's mention of a plague that claimed many lives, but we've talked enough about plagues for 1 year. We'll leave that for now. As the Bnei Yisrael travel along, making our way towards the Promised Land, towards Israel, we stop and we encamp at Arnon. It's a place on the border between Ammon and Moab, right at the river Arnon. There's a mention in this passage of Sefer Milchamos Hashem, the book of the wars of the Lord, literally translated. Some say it's an expression, it's how you talk about history. Others say that no, it's an actual book, that we had it at one time, it was recorded, but it's been lost, as many writings were lost in the years of exile. It says that when the story is ultimately told, or when God's wars are recounted, they're going to talk about what happened at Arnon. What happened at Arnon, you ask? Let's let Rashi explain. It's like this. The Bnei Yisrael went around Moab on the south and the east until they came to Arnon, inside the land of the Amorites, at the northern border of Moab. There's a strip of land that juts out from the border of the Amorite lands, and it's theirs. And it enters Moab all the way up to Arnon. That's where Israel encamped, but they did not enter Moab, the Moabite lands, because they wouldn't allow us in. Although the text doesn't spell this out exactly in Moshe's words, later on Yiftach does say it in as many words, in the book of Shoftim, in the book of Judges. The miracle that they will tell with as much excitement as Yam Suf, the splitting of the sea, Rashi continues, was what happened next. The blood of the Amorites was spilled there because they were hiding in the places where the mountains were high and the valleys were deep and narrow. The Amorites said, when the Jews enter come through this valley, they pass through, we'll jump out of the caves in the mountains and we'll ambush them and we'll kill them. The caves were on the Moabite side. On the Amorite side, directly across, were some pointy outcroppings of rock. So what happened, just as the Jews were about to pass through, before we actually got there, the pointy mountains from one side collapsed onto the caves where the attackers were hiding and crushed them. Now the Bnei Yisrael had not even appeared on the scene yet, so we had no idea what had taken place. There wasn't any sign of this rather fortuitous happenstance, until somebody noticed a trickle of blood coming out from between the rocks, and soon it turned into a flow with, this is a little, you should sign in here that you're 18 years of age or over, with the crushed bodies of the Amorites who were killed before they could carry out their ambush. They were definitely in the wrong place at the wrong time. So when the Jews put two and two together, and we realized that the Amorites were caught between a rock and a hard place, we burst into song, like we had done at the sea when it split for us almost 40 years before. The same words actually introduce this shira that introduced the shira, the song in the other place, Az Yashir. Here it says, Az Yashir Yisrael as Ashir Azois, Ali ve'erenullah, arise, O well from the valley, raise your voices to it. Be'er Chfarua Sarim, a well that was dug by princes. Kar'ua nedivei ha'olam b'mechokek b'mishanosam u'mimidbar matana, carved out by the nobles of the people through the lawgiver and their staffs from the desert as a gift. From when we received this gift, it went down to the streams, and from the streams to the heights, or the heights of Moab, at the top of the summit that overlooks these wastelands. This is all describing the place that we just said from Rashi where it all took place. That's the whole of the Shira. What we said here is all the lines of the Shira. It's just a few verses, not as extensive or dramatic as the other ones, you know. Now the Midrash and Rashi, who quotes it, explain quite miraculously the whole thing with one side of the mountain collapsing into the other side, leaving a clear path for the Israelites and crushing our enemies in the process. But what if it weren't so complicated? What if it was just a good old flash flood that prevented this whole ambush from happening? In fact, that's how a different commentator, Sforno, explains it. The Midrash actually gives both explanations in the original source. Rashi quotes one of the explanations and Sforno quotes the other. Why might that be? And if Rashi is going to say only one, why not the Amorites drowning in water in a flood, in a flash flood, which is a lot more resonant with the story that we know from Kriyas Yamsuf, from the splitting of the sea on the way out of Egypt. Could be that the parallel is stronger with the first Midrash, so that's why Rashi uses it to explain what happened, how this miraculous incident parallels the splitting of the sea, because at the splitting of the sea, back in Exodus, Chumash Shemais, the would-be attackers pursued and were demolished, without the Jews having to do anything. Right? As we read in one of the verses way back there, Hashem yelachem lachem, God will fight for you. You don't need to take up arms. Here too, the would-be ambush party was foiled before we even realized what was happening, much less thought about anything to do about it. We didn't need to take arms. Their arms appeared in the water, and their legs, apparently. So there were two elements to the extraordinary happenings here. One is that the Jewish people were delivered, rescued, saved, without having to do anything, even without noticing it. And second, when evidence appeared and we realized what had taken place, we did burst out in a song of thanksgiving. So the Kedushas Levi contrasts these two songs that we're discussing here, one at the sea and one here, the song at the well. He writes that the words at the Song of the Sea are very clear and easily understood. And here in our Parsha, in this Shira, the words are not so easy to decode, a little bit more cryptic, mysterious. He suggests that at the sea, Moshe Rabbeinu saw with a clear prophetic vision, Aspaklaria Ha'me'ira, it's called, so he could express the wondrous happenings without allusion or parable or coded language. This song, the one in our Parsha, is not Moshe's composition. It's the Jewish people who wrote it. That's why it says, Az Yashir Yisrael. Just as the Jews burst into song. Of course, it was divinely inspired. But our vision was not as clear as Moshe's. That's called Aspaklaria She'ena Me'ira. Not so clear. And Kedushas Levi goes on further to emphasize the point that at times Hashem makes miracles for the Bnei Yisrael when we cry out in need, like at the sea. And at other times, like this deliverance at Arnon, we don't even recognize the need. God has already dispatched the rescue. There's an oft-quoted Gemara in Tractate Megillah that says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makdim refuah lamaka, that the cure is already on the way before we even realize we have the ailment. Another compelling insight into this week's Parsha, into this particular section, comes from Rabbi Yitzhak Arama from Spain. He's writing in the late 1400s, just before the expulsion, And he really cuts to the quick of the wartime mentality. He writes in his commentary called Akedas Yitzchak, he says, during wartime, not only does one concentrate on hating and killing the enemy, but the values that are paramount during times of peace tend to become perverted. Cruelty and murder occur even among brothers in arms, members of the same side. Actions which are unavoidable in war have a way of developing into independent virtues in wartime, corrupting all normal everyday norms. Later on, he continues, it's not enough to prepare for war and resolve that if peace comes up, you'll accept it. War is only acceptable, sort of b'di'evet. War is only acceptable because of the peace and the reign of justice that follow it. In other words, it's not such a healthy mental state to be on a permanent wartime footing. You see from societies that are overly militaristic, over time, that belligerent stance starts to make itself felt throughout society. How could the Jewish people in our days, how have we been able, by and large, to avoid that? Could be that we recognize that it's not all about us and the work of our own hands. Certainly, we've seen miraculous occurrences in our lives. The longer you've been around, most probably, the more miracles you've seen. What's still more challenging for us to realize, even though this whole section of the song at the well is it's for us to understand and appreciate what's going on behind the scenes. Miracles, as it were, that never come to our field of vision. They don't show up on our radar. There's not much comfort in saying, well, things could have been worse, I'm sure. So maybe we should say that same sentiment, but just say it, flip it over, flip the script, they like to say. Say it in a positive way. Let's say we have many, many things to be thankful for. Some of them we're aware of, and some of them we're not aware of, or at least not yet. You can say a lot with a little, and people who have a custom of saying thanks God, or Baruch Hashem, Chazdei Hashem, or other phrases like that, are expressing a lot with a few words. I used to tease my friends when they would say Baruch Hashem. I would say, Baruch Hashem what? Finish the sentence, tell me the whole story. But I sort of eased up on that because it became clear that as long as we're still here, there's a lot we can appreciate and a lot we can say thank you for. And not necessarily every bit of that can be expressed verbally because not necessarily are we aware of every bit of it. So I encourage us all to sing more frequently. A song that you know the words to, a song that doesn't have any words, that you're singing is probably more important than what we're singing. If you can express the feeling of appreciation, thanksgiving, so much the better. Let's think of this Shabbos as a refresher course in Shabbos Shira, the Shabbat of song. We'll call it a Shabbos Shira booster. How about that? Even as we come to the end of a long sojourn in the desert, we can still summon up the sounds of song in the model of our ancestors, the Jews in the desert. That's one insight for this parsha. Let's not overstate our case too much and say that our last 16 months of quarantine have been like 40 years in the desert, although some of the days and the weeks have felt pretty long and even hard to keep track of sometime. One thing we can take away from the portion of Shlach is that as Jews, our song will not be silenced. Good Shabbos.